You will have the chance to see it later. Okay, don't worry too much about that. Now, let's keep going with the example I am talking about. So, Fido sees a tortoise. We have a basic mental space that illustrates this. In this mental space, there are two elements, Fido's and the tortoise. Okay. Now, in the next sentence, he chases it. We also have a similar mental space in which we have Fidos and tortoise, and chase is represented by another space or frame in which we have the treasures and the chased. Now, starting from the next sentence, he thinks that the tortoise is slow. With this sentence, we have two mental spaces. In the base mental space, Fido sees the tortoise, traces the tortoise. Now, in another space, he believes that, or he thinks that it is slow. And in the belief space, we also have two elements. The tortoise and Fidos, and there is an access line. You can see two access line, from A1 to A2, B1 to B2. Now this explains how we understand the third sentence with reference to the previous two by building mental spaces. Now, when I say but it is fast, we have a similar mental space structure with the base domain and the belief domain. Now, when we put everything together, you see we have a complicated architecture like what you see on the screen. The possibility mental space, the base space, and the belief space. Now, in even more complicated discourse, we may have more mental spaces. In these simple examples, you can see three mental spaces, not mentioning the frames that are triggered, and there are access across the elements. Later on in your textbook, there will be practice exercises that ask you to illustrate the discourse, the text in the same way. So basically, those exercises require you to do things that are similar to this. You need to draw mental spaces, identify the elements, and see how they are related to each other. Okay, so with that, we are now ready to talk about conceptual planning, which is a little bit more complicated than mental space in explaining how meaning is constructed. Now, so conceptual metaphor is already, as we have discussed, a quite successful theory that helps us to understand the structure of thinking in human beings. However, conceptual metaphor still fail to answer the questions why we have new meaning. For example, when I say the surgeon or that surgeon is a butcher, now when I say this, I do not maps elements from the surgeon to the butcher only. I do not only talk about the surgeon in domain in terms of the butcher domain, but I also make a negative comment about the skill of the doctor, of the surgeon. So okay, there is a question that arises: how is it possible for new meanings to emerge? And the planning theory comes about just to answer that question. Planning theory, okay, starts from the mental space that we have just discussed by Gilles Fauconnier, and it also borrows ideas from the conceptual metaphor theories as discussed by Mark Turner in the literary language. Now, you will see things that are similar in the mental space. Now, this is a basic architecture uh, of planning. When I say that surgeon is a butcher, we have instantly two input domains: the surgeon domain and the butcher domains. I think we talked about this a little bit in the introduction to cognitive semantics already. Now, in the two domains, we have elements, like in the surgeon domain. In the first input domain, we have surgeon, his identity, the patient, the scalpel, the goal of the operation is to heal the patient. And in the butcher domain, we have similar elements that can be mapped. Now, these two input domains will have, as you can see, connections or mappings, but very soon we will discuss how the connection or the mappings in planning theories differs from those of the conceptual metaphor. Now, looking at the top, you can see a generic space, that is a space that we build in our conceptions that connects to the two input space. It generalizes those two. For example, we have the agent element that can be the surgeon or the butcher. We have the instruments that can be the scalpel or the big knife, the cleaver. We have the workplace as an element that can be the operating room or the abattoir. Now, in the planning space, we start to connect some elements in input space 1 with some elements in input domain 2, and this helps us to explain why new meaning arises. Because when we put one element to the other that are not necessarily unidirectional mappings, we have new patterns. So this property or this element can match with another element that is not unidirectional in a conceptual metaphor. So I hope this image on the screen help us to have an overview of what the conceptual planning look like. Now, conceptual planning theories is not only used to explain metaphorical instances of languages. We can use this to analyze non-metaphorical instances too. For example, now look at the example that I put on our slide. In France, Bill Clinton couldn't have been harmed by his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. Now, when we say this, we have two input spaces. One is about the context of the United States, and the other is about the context of France. And we also have a generic space with elements like country, president, citizens, and a sexual partner. Now, if you look closely, you can see that the input 1 and input 2 domains, they have lines that connect the elements together, but not all of them are connected in the same way. For example, with US and France, we have the country, but now Lewinsky in the planning space is not connected to the mysteries. And in a couple of moments we will discuss the natures of these kinds of connections or mappings. Now there's another note that I would like to make here. In the exercises in your textbook, they will also give you similar examples and ask you to draw the integration networks or the architectures of conceptual planning. It's something similar to this. You need to build the input space, the two input space, generic space, and the planning space. Now please look very closely at the planning space. In this example, we have matchings of elements in input space 1 with elements in input space 2, but not all of them are matched together. So in this planning process, we can have new patterns that occur. And again, this is how the planning theory explain for construction of meaning. How we understand illiteral meaning, or the implicit message that it make in this sentence. For example, when I say in France, Bill Clinton couldn't have been harmed by his relationship with Monica Lewinsky, I mean that I interpret this as a criticism toward the politics system of the United States. So this kind of new meanings emerge because in the planning space we mixed those different elements of input space 1 and input space 2 in new patterns. Right. So there's another question in the textbook about the constitutive processes for planning theory, and this is it. Actually, I take this from the textbook. So the process is like this. First, we have connections from input space 1 to input space 2, and then from those connections we build the generic space, and then we build the planning space, and then there will be selected. Not all elements of the two input space will be projected into the planning. There will be selective projections, and in the in last step we see meaning that emerges, and with this we have other processes like composition, completion, elaborations, and in the textbook there are quite detailed discussions about this process that you can look at. Now let's now look at other cases in which we can use the conceptual planning theory to explain for how meaning is constructed. Now, when I say as we went to press, okay, Rich Wilson and Bill Bewinger were bravely maintaining a 4.5-day lead over the gods of the Clipper Northern Light. Now, when I say this, okay, the new meaning that arises here is that the new record is just a very thin lead from that was set up by the Northern Lights long ago. And the way we come up to this new meaning is also by you see, setting up input spaces, generic space, and planning space. However, the special thing about the conceptual planning theory is that it also allows us to to build a model for explaining how meanings are made in sentence structures, and you will see that in cognitive grammar if you have time to read ahead the next part. Now on the screen now you can see a series of sentences that follow the formula X, Y, Z constructions, like children are the richest of poor men. Money is the root of all evil. When we say these things, we have input space 1, input space 2, and we plan elements from those two spaces to interpret the meaning. So you will come up again with conceptual metaphor in you come up again with conceptual planning when we use this to explain how sentence structures are made. Now the conceptual planning theory can also be used to explain how we make sense of situations that are non-linguistics. For example, when we look at the desktop screen on our computers, we also see files, folders, icons, but there are actions that we will never do on the computer screen. I'm sorry, there are actions that we do on the computer screen that will never happen in the real in the real office environment. For example, when you delete a folder, it will be something that is different from the input space of the real office. And I also encourage you to read ahead the parts in the textbook that discuss the cases of parables. Parables are stories for kids that you read often, in which animals talk, and there will be moral lessons to learn from those. Now in those parables, actually we have two input spaces, the animal space and the human space, and we understand the meanings of those stories because we can build the planned space. Now we can also use the conceptual planning theory to understand the religious rituals. There is a very interesting analysis of the Christian uh, rituals in the textbook, and I encourage you to read ahead. For the sake of time, we do not go into details here. Now, the special thing about conceptual planning is that it can involve more than 4 spaces. To see things getting more and more complicated as we reach the end of the course. With conceptual metaphor, we have only 2 domains or 2 spaces, right? The target and the source. Now, with the planning theory, if we if we are in a complicated situation, we might come up with more than 4 spaces. Now, if you look at the figure in our screen, you can see that to analyze how we construct meaning, how we understand that, the Grim Reaper that is illustrated in the textbook, we need to build 6 mental spaces in all. Now, in the last slide, I just want to discuss the differences between conceptual metaphor theory and the conceptual planning, and how they can support each other. Now, of course, the conceptual planning theory borrows ideas from conceptual metaphor. It came about after the conceptual metaphor theory. It also borrowed ideas from the mental spaces of theory of Fauconnier. But there are some key differences that we should be aware of. Now, not all the plans, as you see in the 4 space models, in last space we have the planning space. Not all plans are metaphorical. Some are non-metaphorical, and we can also have non-linguistic plans. Now, planning in the conceptual planning theories does not involve unidirectional mappings like in the case of conceptual metaphor, and we have just mentioned this when we look at the illustrations on the screen. And this explains how we can have dynamic meaning constructions rather than static. Spaces as defined in the mental space are also different from the domains, and I encourage you to come back to read more about the structures of a domain and the structures of a mental space. Now, in the conceptual planning theory, we can have the many space model like the one that we saw before we came here to this slide. It not necessarily 4 space. It can be 5, 6, 7, or even more spaces involved in interpreting a piece of discourse. Now, why the conceptual metaphor help us to understand conventional knowledge that is entrenched in human in human thinking. For example, when we say in my opinion, then opinion is conceptualized. Ideas are conceptualized as a container. And we try to understand that with the conceptual metaphor theory. So in conceptual metaphor, the knowledge that we explore is conventionalized. It is fixed. Ideas are full. Organization are plans. what else? Love is a journey. Argument is war. Now, all of those are conventionalized, and they exist um, as universals in a lot of cultures. While with conceptual planning, we are not looking at a moral that happens to describe that knowledge structure. Instead, we try to understand, we try to explain how, okay, is it possible for humans to, you know, um, to uh, understand new meaning that keep arising depending on the change in the context or the change in the uh, uh, participants. There is also a difference in the methodological emphasis. Why with conceptual planning we focus on how new meaning is constructed. In conceptual metaphor theories, we are more interested with how we coin new expression, how we build knowledge. And of course, in the conceptual planning theories, the key thing is to investigate how new structure, meaning how new meaning can arise. Okay, so I hope I have provided you overview of the things that you may need to read for these two chapters on mental spaces and conceptual planning. I remember that several students choose to work on this topic, so it can be interesting. Now, conceptual planning is used later, as I have already explained, in cognitive grammar, to analyze sentence structure. All right, this is the end of our lecture. You have any questions or comments? Now I invite you, if you like, to unmute yourself. Now please look at the control panel on your left hand. You should see your microphone. By default they are muted. Click on that to unmute yourself, and you can add the questions, or you can type the question into the chat window. Now, okay, so now it's time for questions. You can ask questions about what we have discussed, or you can ask questions about the final essays, or the final evaluation. And as I have said, I'm sorry that we do not have another webinar as I planned originally, because the schedule for us here is very tight, and this is the online the only webinar that I can make before I come back home. Okay, and it look like the internet connection is not very good all the time. I don't know why, but Anymeeting is taking a lot of resources of my computer, and sometimes it hangs. Yes, I have got a question here from Nhi. This is also the last lesson of the course. I mean, this is the last meeting of the course. But in the textbook you can see that there are a lot of things that we have not explored yet. But for the final exam questions, we will work only with part 1 and part 2 of the textbook. So overview cognitive linguistics, and then cognitive cognitive semantics. Right. We have a question from Thịnh. Thịnh, you want to ask something? Well, if you feel a little bit confused now, then just sit back and don't worry, because there are actually similarities between domains and space. However, in space, we mainly define elements and properties for the purpose of building connections, while in conceptual domains we also have knowledge structures, but they are there to explain for the mappings that we see from the source to the target. So if you really want to know the differences between conceptual metaphor theory and conceptual planning, this is it. In conceptual metaphor theory, we do not try to answer questions like how a new meaning created. When I say in my opinion, well, you see, I'm using a conceptual metaphor, and there is no new meaning that is constructed. But in the examples that we have explored in this lesson, we always see a new meaning structure that arises, and that's cannot be explained from the theory of conceptual metaphor theory, and we need the conceptual planning theory to explain for that. So I hope I answered your question. All right. Well, thank you. Well, I got a question here from Quốc Anh. Yes. Okay, be sure that the computer test, when I go back home, will be for part 1 and part 2, and the question will go around the exercises in the textbook. So as long as you try to answer those, try to answer questions from the exercises, you will feel safe. I do not plan to ask you very complicated questions or questions that you may not have answers, but as you see, the purpose of this is to make sure that you do the reading and you have basic understanding. So basic understandings is what I'm looking for. For in-depth understanding, well, I look for that in your essay. Now, any other questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Take. Okay, thank you. It's now 4:15 and I'm staying in Ramat Retro Hotel, which is in the suburb of Jerusalem, and right out of the window I can see Bethlehem. That's the hometown of Jesus Christ, and where Mother Mary lived and raised Jesus Christ. If you are interested, I can point a webcam there for you to have a look, but I'm not sure whether you are interested. And it's now 4 in the afternoon, so we are 5 hours below behind Vietnam. Okay, so the weather here is okay for me, although it's dry, so the humidity is very low. When we wash clothes, for example, just leave it in the room and they dry very quickly. Yeah.
Is it hotter or colder than Osman City?
Or it's now the beginning of winter, and right now it's about 10 degrees Celsius. At night it may go down to 3 or 5. But
So you must be wearing a lot of clothes.
yeah, thank you. Not really, not really cold, because the humidity is low. The air is dry. You see, later on when you travel, you can see, as long as you can you can stand the coldness in the northern part of Vietnam, you will survive anywhere, because in the northern part of Vietnam it's cold and at the same time it's very humid. Humidity is very high, so you feel like it's a, uh, biting your skin. But here, it's much less humid. Surrounded by desert, so even if the temperature is low, there is not a lot of water around the air, so you do not feel that much cold, unless when it is windy. Well, when there's wind, it can be really cold. Okay, now any other questions? When is the midterm test? I have told you, me, the midterm test. Wow, and then another question about the final paper submission. Now, the deadline for the final paper submission, I believe, is already in the M-Learning course. Okay, when you go to the M-Learning course, you see a link to submit your final paper, and click on that. You see the deadline with the date and time. Make sure that you submit your assignment before the deadline, because the system will automatically close and there's nothing I can do about it, because in the last week I will travel a lot and possibly there will be very little chance for me to use the internet in the last week. And for the midterm test, yes, we will do it in the computer lab, and I will let you know when I go back home. Okay. If you do not have any other questions, then I think it's time for us to say goodbye. So thank you for joining me in this online webinar. It's a very memorable experience for me, teaching you from the place where I am. And I need to stop here and get prepared for the next webinar for the computer assisted language learning course. So if you are in that course too, stay. I know it's now 9:20 in the evening in Vietnam. Okay, yeah. So I will make sure that I email you about the midterm plan. But I will come back to Vietnam around the 27th or 28th of December, and I will try to give you the midterm test before the new year, so that you can dedicate your time to the other final exams. All right. So goodbye and good night. To those who are not in the computer assisted language learning course. For those who are, well, see you again very soon. Bye bye.